This is a lesson video for 8.5 Day 2. 8.5 Day 1 is a tough lesson where you're working on factoring with monomials and grouping. And so the second day, we're going to need that skill, and then we take it one step farther. So yesterday, you worked on using distributive property to factor polynomials. And today, we're going to use that skill with something called zero product property. Hang in there on this and make the effort to understand, to pause the video in places, to have good notes, and then to ask questions of Alexis or Raquel or the substitute if you have questions. So the big idea is, what is this thing called zero product property? And I wish they would call it, instead of zero product property, if I multiply and get 0, I know something. I'm going to say I know, and I'm going to leave some space for coming back to that, okay? I know something. So let me introduce this with kind of the idea of a little game. If I tell you I have two numbers, one's written on my hand, my left hand, one's written on my right hand, and they multiply to make 24, would you guarantee that on first guess you could tell me what my two numbers are, or even what one of them is? Now, if I were in class, you'd all be guessing. 8 times 3, 24 times 1. But here's the thing, you'd have to guess. You wouldn't know for sure what one of my numbers is because there are many possibilities. And therefore, you wouldn't want to bet, even if you would, because you don't know what any of the numbers are. It could be 1 times 24. It could be 2 times 12, 3 times 8. So two numbers that multiply to make 24, I don't know what either number is. Too many possibilities, including decimals and stuff like that. If I tell you they multiply to be 8, still too many possibilities. It could be 1 times 8, could be 2 times 4, could be some fractions like 8/3 times 3, so etc., meaning there's more. Many possibilities still. But if I tell you my two numbers multiply to be 0, you should be able to tell me at least one of my numbers. If I say that one number times something else gets me 0, the only way to multiply and make 0 is one of my numbers could be 0, or they both are. 0 times 0 would work. 0 times anything would work. So zero product property says, up at the top, if I multiply and get 0, I know one or both numbers is 0. Factors, because factors are the things I multiply, is 0. And you learn that in grade school when anything times 0 equals 0. So math does this more formally. Remember to pause the video if you need to go slower and get your writing down neatly. If the product, if I multiply two factors and I get 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. So here's how math uses this. Math uses it to solve equations that we don't have another way to solve easily. So I've got an equation down below that says solve, and it lists an equation in factored form. It is two quantities, two parentheses, multiplied together. And it says that when they're multiplied, they equal 0. That's kind of awesome because zero product property says I just multiplied this first item times the second item, I got 0. Zero product property says either your first item, that entire parentheses must be worth 0, or your second entire factor or parenthesis set must be worth 0. This gives me two really easy equations I can solve, but this only works if they multiply together and make 0. If they multiply together and make 24 or any other value, I don't know that one of them needs to be 0, so this wouldn't work unless I can get it into factored form on one side and 0 on the other side. Once I've got that and I know that two possibilities are this, then I want to go do some good equation solving and come up with my two solutions. This is a quadratic equation. It has x to the first power multiplied by x to the first power. So it can have up to two solutions. And one of them is that if I make x 5, this equation does make 0 for the other side. Or if I subtract 3 on both sides, my other solution is that if x is negative 3, putting negative 3 back into both parentheses, that will make the entire equation true. So if I went back and checked, if I put 5 in, this is my check step, if I put 5 in, that first parentheses is going to be 5 minus 5. And the second one's going to be 5 plus 3. And that's 0 times 8, which is 0. That checks. I'm going to check my other potential solution. I think there's 2. In there, I think negative 3 will work. So negative 3 minus 5 times negative 3 plus 3. And I'm checking to see if that will make it 0 on the other side. I'll have negative 8 times 0, which is 0. It works. So we're going to solve again by the zero product property. Ideally, meaning in the simplest form, we have it as an expression times an expression, a factor times a factor equal to 0. So again, some steps over here. So zero product property says set each factor, each multiplied part, equal to 0 and find out what makes each of those worth 0. I'm going to put the word or in between because x can't be both numbers at the same time. So there are 2 possibilities for x, and do a little solving. Good Aunt Sally undoing. Divide both sides. So I get that if x is negative 1/3, this equation will work. And I also get that if x is 2, this equation will be true. So if I had to give the solutions to the equation, I have 2 of them. They're not an ordered pair. They're not an x and a y. My x could be 2 or negative 1/3. So I'm going to leave that example showing because it's going to help us with this next one. In the example we just did, it was already a factored expression. We didn't have to do any of the factoring we learned yesterday. Well, now this expression in our next example is not factored. So we need to factor the expression, and the first kind of factoring we should check for is that greatest common factor. What can I take out of both terms and pull out by distributive property? So I see 12 and I see a 4, and I know they share a factor of 4. And I know they each share a factor of y. So that's going to be the expression I pull out of both of them. That's going to be my first factor. And then to make that factor, that's going to be a 3y and a minus 1. So my first step was I need to factor the expression. I need to actually get it into factor times factor equals 0. Adding and subtracting to make 0 have too many possibilities. And if you want, you could put that first factor in parentheses to make it feel like you've got factor times factor. Since they're equal to 0, zero product property says, oh, well, each factor then gets a chance to be 0 and see what happens. So if my first factor is 0, my monomial factor, or my binomial factor is 0, do a little solving and see what you come up with. I got that y might itself just be 0, or divide both sides by 3. Again, pause the video to work this through more slowly if that's what you need. All right, we're going to do one last one that's in its form that I'm giving it to you in, and then we're going to work on a word problem. So it says factor the expression because the first step in this is factor the expression and check, is it equal to 0? Ours is. Awesome. 2, we need to factor it so that we've got multiplied values on this side. So my greatest common factor here is a 5x. So I've got a 1 minus 8x as my factoring. 0. Make sure you carry through all the parts. Factoring means I've got it in something times something form. And if you'd like, put parentheses around that. So I see that I have amount times amount. Zero product property says, okay, you checked number 1, it's equal to 0. You checked number 2, it's factored. Then each of those factors gets set equal to 0. And we solve. So solving here, I get that x is 0. That's one possibility. Solving here, I want to subtract a 1, so this is a good review of good equation solving skills. Don't lose your negatives. Divided by -8. I get that x is positive 1/8 as my other solution. All right, last thing before we spring you to homework, a word problem. Height can be modeled by an expression that's quadratic. So when I throw something in the air, kick something in the air, even when I drop something, the height of an object that gravity is affecting has an equation that we can use to predict where in the air it's going to be. So they give that to us. The height of a football is modeled by this. So since they just gave us that equation, I want you guys to take it out onto an area where you can write on your notes. And what I want to do is I want to be sure I know what the inputs and outputs are. That's the height of the football at any time I'm curious from when they kick it to when it lands. And then x is the number of seconds after it was kicked. And it says find all times when the ball is at a height of 0. So I want to put a height of 0 in over here. Now I want to find all the times that the ball was on the ground. And we're pretty sure at the very beginning when the football player kicks it, it should be at a height of 0. But the second answer, the when does it get back to being at 0 again, is going to tell us something about how long the ball stayed in the air. So now I've got this written in what looks like reverse. Go to the steps up above and say, okay, is it equal to 0? Yes. I want to factor the expression on the left. So I see as far as GCF factoring goes, I see that I could definitely take out a 16 and I could take out an x from both terms. So 16 and an x. That's going to leave me a negative x plus 3 is my other factor. Zero product property says go ahead and set each of those factors equal to 0 now. 16x could be worth 0. Put it in parentheses if you like. Negative x plus 3 is worth 0. So again, solving these, it's going to tell me one thing I already suspected, that at a time of 0 seconds, we were on the ground, the football was. But I'm going to do a little solving here and divide by a negative. And I'm going to find out that also at 3 seconds, the ball was on the ground again. So I know the ball started at time 0, was kicked, and 3 seconds later was back on the ground at a height of 0, so it stayed in the air for 3 seconds. Your homework, the second day on 8-5, again, asking for help from all the available resources, including Mr. Rogaszewski, your resource teachers, the sub, the teacher's aides, all of those people. So get a piece of loose leaf and get this labeled, please, from page 497, and then start to work on it. See you soon.